There's a certain kind of silence that settles in a house when children are finally asleep. It's not an empty silence. It's thick with the ghost of the day's chaos, the echoes of laughter, the phantom stickiness of juice on the countertops, the memory of tiny feet thundering down the hall. For the past 5 years since my husband Frank passed away, that silence has been my companion. But for the last 3 since my daughter Emily's second child Leo was born, I've traded my quiet evenings for a different kind of quiet, the exhausted, satisfied peace of a grandmother who has spent the day knee-deep in Legos and storybooks. I wouldn't have it any other way. My grandchildren, 7-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Leo, are the twin sons my world revolves around. And my daughter Emily, well, she's the reason I get up in the morning. Seeing her happy, seeing her thrive in the life she chose was my only remaining ambition, or so I thought. I used to be Carol Matheson Elementary School principal. I managed hundreds of kids, a staff of 50, and a budget that would make your head spin. I was organized, respected, and I knew how to handle a crisis. Now I was just Nana, a title I wore more proudly than any professional one. I'd arrive at Emily and David's house, a sprawling modern thing in a pristine suburban development that always felt a little too quiet at 8 in the morning, and leave well after the kids were in bed and the dishwasher was humming its nightly tune. I did it because Emily was overwhelmed. She was a brilliant graphic designer who'd put her thriving freelance career on hold to raise her children, a decision her husband David publicly praised as a noble sacrifice, but privately treated as a license for him to become completely detached from the daily realities of parenthood. David was in tech sales, a world of soaring ambitions and crushing pressure. He was successful, I'll give him that. He provided them with a beautiful house, expensive cars, and vacations I could only dream of. But the cost of that provision was his presence, both physical and emotional. He was a ghost in his own family's life, a passing shadow in the morning, and a tired, irritable man on his laptop late at night. So I stepped in. I filled the gaps. I was the co-pilot, the sous chef, the laundry fairy, the storyteller, the kisser of scraped knees. I did it for Emily so she could have a few hours to breathe. I did it for the kids so they would have the consistent, loving attention they deserved. And I did it for me because their joy filled the quiet corners of my own life. The night it all shattered was a Thursday. David was hosting a party at their house, a critically important networking event. His boss, a vice president from the corporate office, was in town, and David was wound tighter than a watch spring. The house, usually a landscape of colorful toys and comfortable clutter, had been sterilized. Caterers moved through the kitchen with silent efficiency, their food a world away from the chicken nuggets and apple slices I usually prepared. I had been tasked with the most crucial role of all, keeping Lily and Leo invisible. Carol David had said to me that morning, not making eye contact as he straightened his tie, "I need them out of sight and out of mind. No screaming, no running, no interruptions. This is $1 million night for me." He didn't ask. He instructed. I just nodded my smile, feeling tight on my face. It was for Emily. It was for the family. So I played my part. I set up a movie marathon in the upstairs playroom, complete with a fortress of pillows and a contraband amount of popcorn. I read Where the Wild Things Are in a dramatic whisper for the 10th time, my voice growing hoarse. For hours I was the gatekeeper of childhood, ensuring its messy, beautiful reality didn't spill over and stain the pristine, artificial world David was trying to sell downstairs. Around 9 o'clock, Leo was finally asleep, his small body curled up in his bed, one hand clutching his worn teddy bear. Lily was quietly drawing at her small desk. I slipped downstairs to get her a glass of water, moving like a shadow through my own daughter's home. The party was in full swing. Muted jazz played from hidden speakers. Men and women in expensive suits held delicate wine glasses, their laughter low and polite. I saw David across the room, his arm draped casually over the back of a leather armchair where a distinguished-looking man with silver hair was sitting. This had to be the boss, Mr. Sterling. David was animated, his smile wide, his gestures expansive. He was performing. As I filled a cup at the kitchen sink, I saw them stand up and move toward the hallway right past the kitchen entrance. I flattened myself against the wall behind the refrigerator, not wanting to be seen. They paused just a few feet away. "This is a beautiful home, David Mr. Sterling," said his voice, a rich baritone. "Your wife has wonderful taste." "Thank you, sir," David said, his voice oozing with a practiced deference. "We love it here. It's a great place to raise the kids, mister." Sterling then gestured vaguely up the stairs. "And you have a full-time nanny for the little ones. Smart move. Can't be too careful these days." My heart did a little flip. I expected David to correct him. I expected him to say, "Oh no, that's my mother-in-law, Carol. She's a lifesaver. We couldn't do it without her." I waited for the words of acknowledgement, the small token of appreciation that would have made all the thankless hours worthwhile. But the words never came. Instead, David let out a short, dismissive laugh. He leaned in conspiratorially, his voice dropping to a loud whisper I could hear as clearly as if he'd shouted it. "Oh, her," he said, and the contempt in his tone was a physical blow. No, that's just the babysitter. My wife's mother. She helps out. You know Howard Island? Just the babysitter." The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering and cruel. They pierced through the muffled jazz, through the polite laughter, and straight into my heart. Just the babysitter. Not family. Not Nana. Not the woman who potty-trained his son, who taught his daughter to read, who cooked and cleaned and cared for his family day in and day out, without ever asking for a dime. I was a service. A convenience. An interchangeable part, as disposable as the caterer's napkins. In that moment, something inside me, something I didn't even know was fragile, broke. The patient, accommodating, peacekeeping Carol Matheson, the retired principal, the devoted grandmother, simply vanished. And in her place, a different woman emerged. A woman who was cold, clear, and absolutely unequivocally done. I didn't make a sound. I waited until they moved on, their laughter echoing down the hall. I walked back upstairs, my movements calm and deliberate, the glass of water steady in my hand. I looked at Lily, her head bent over her, drawing her brow furrowed in concentration. I looked at the closed door to Leo's room, behind which my grandson was sleeping peacefully. These were not the children of my employer. They were my flesh and blood, and they and their mother deserved better. I made a decision, a tectonic shift in the landscape of my life. The ground had opened up beneath me, and I was not going to fall. I was going to fly. "Lily, sweetheart," I said, my voice even and calm. "How would you like to have a sleepover at Nana's house tonight?" Her head popped up, her eyes wide with delight. "Really, can we, Nana? Can we go right now?" "Yes," I said, a cold, hard certainty settling in my soul as I picked up the phone to call a car service. "We can go right now. My son-in-law wanted a babysitter. Fine." The babysitter just quit, and she was taking her grandkids with her. I'm so glad you're here to witness this. If this story is already hitting home, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss what happens next, and I want to know just how many of you out there have ever felt invisible. Let me know in the comments. The show is just getting started. The 20-minute drive from their sterile suburban palace to my cozy, lived-in condo felt like a journey across a vast ocean. In the back of the town car, Leo was a warm sleeping weight in his car seat, oblivious to the earthquake that had just fractured our family. But Lily, ever perceptive, was buzzing with a quiet, anxious energy. She sat beside her brother, her small fingers tracing patterns on the fogged-up window. "Nana," she said, her voice small in the dark, cavernous space of the car. "Why did Daddy say you were the babysitter?" The question was a tiny perfect arrow, and it found its mark. I glanced at her in the rear-view mirror, her face illuminated by the passing streetlights. How do you explain the casual cruelty of a parent to their own child? How do you articulate a wound that is all about tone and context and years of unspoken dismissiveness? Sometimes, sweetheart, I began choosing my words with the care of a bomb disposal expert. Grown-ups say silly things when they're trying to impress other grown-ups. It doesn't mean they're true. It was a weak answer. A bandage on a gaping wound, and I knew it. Lily seemed to know it too. She was silent for a moment, then said, "But it wasn't silly. It was mean. It made you look sad." Out of the mouths of babes. She had seen it. In that split second before my face had composed itself into a mask of calm resolve, she had seen the raw, unfiltered hurt. Her validation was a strange comfort, a confirmation that I wasn't being overly sensitive, that the slight was as real as the cold glass of the window she was leaning against. "You're right, sweetie," I said, my voice a little thick. "It was mean. And that's why we're going to have a sleepover at Nana's. We all need a little break from meanness tonight." That seemed to satisfy her. She leaned her head back and began to hum a tune from the movie we had watched, her small anxieties soothed by the promise of a change of scenery. By the time we arrived at my building, my phone had started to buzz. I ignored it. I knew who it was. The party must be winding down. The host would be looking for his props, the perfect wife, the well-behaved children to complete the performance for his departing guests. I imagined his slight annoyance turning to confusion, then to irritation, as he realized the props were missing. Getting 2 sleepy children and their overnight bags up to my third-floor condo was a logistical challenge, but I moved with a focused energy I hadn't felt in years. This was my territory, my rules, my sanctuary. The condo was filled with the things I loved, floor to ceiling, bookshelves, comfortable, slightly worn furniture, and photos. So many photos. Photos of Emily as a gap-toothed kid, of Frank and me on our wedding day, and dozens of Lily and Leo, their bright, shining faces, a testament to the love that filled my life. This was a home, not a showpiece. I tucked Leo, who had barely stirred, into the bed in my spare room. I set Lily up on the pull-out sofa in the living room, a place she adored, surrounding her with her favorite pillows and the Afghan I had knitted for her. As I was smoothing her hair back from her forehead, my phone buzzed again, this time with a frantic, insistent rhythm. It was David. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text message appeared. "Where are you? Where are the kids?" Another one immediately after. "This isn't funny, Carol. Call me now." The sheer audacity of his tone, the commanding, impatient bark of his words only solidified my resolve. He wasn't worried. He was inconvenienced. The babysitter had gone off script, and it was messing up his evening. Then the phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Emily. My heart ached. This was the part I dreaded. My fight was with David, but Emily was caught in the crossfire. I knew she would be scared and confused. I answered on the second ring. "Mom." Her voice was a panicked whisper. "Mom, what's going on?" David is freaking out. He said, "You're not answering your phone." "Where are you? Are the kids okay?" "We're fine, honey," I said, my voice calm and steady. "We're at my place. The kids are already in bed. We're having a little sleepover." There was a stunned silence on the other end. I could hear David's angry voice in the background, muffled but furious. "A sleepover," Emily repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. "Mom, you can't just take them." "What happened?" David said. "You just vanished." I took a deep breath. "Emily, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your husband, in front of his boss, referred to me as just the babysitter. He dismissed me and everything I do for you and for those children as if I were a hired hand he could barely be bothered to remember the name of." I let the words sink in. I heard her sharp intake of breath. "Oh, Mom," she whispered. He didn't mean it like that. You know how he gets when he's stressed about work. He says stupid things." The excuse was so familiar, so practiced. How many times had she said that to me? How many times had she said it to herself? "No, Emily," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. This time he meant it exactly like that. He meant that I am a function, not a family member. He meant that my love is a service he is entitled to. And I am done. I am done being treated like that. I could hear her starting to cry, soft, helpless sounds that tore at my heart. "But Mom, you should have just talked to me. You can't just take the kids. David is going to lose his mind. Let him," I said, a cold fury rising in me again. It's time someone disrupted his perfectly managed world. For years, you and I have tiptoed around his moods, his stress, his ambition. We have all made ourselves smaller so that he could feel bigger. That ends tonight. The children are safe here with me. They will stay here until their father is ready to have an honest conversation with their mother about what family and respect actually mean. "What do you want me to do?" she wailed, and I could hear the sheer exhaustion in her voice. She was a soldier on a battlefield being pulled in two directions, and she had no fight left in her. "I want you to stop making excuses for him," I said softly. "I want you to think about what you want, what you deserve. For now, just get through the rest of the night. Tell him the kids are safe. Tell him I will not be answering my phone again tonight. The ball is in his court. Or rather, I corrected myself, it's in yours." I ended the call before she could argue further, my hand trembling slightly. This was the hardest part. I had just thrown a grenade into my daughter's life, and I had no idea what the fallout would be. I had started a war not just for my own dignity, but for hers, too. The question was she ready to fight? The rest of the night passed in a state of suspended animation. I sat in the dim light of my living room watching the steady rise and fall of Lily's chest as she slept a sentinel guarding a fragile peace. My phone lay dark and silent on the coffee table. I had turned it off. I knew any further communication that night would be a storm of David's rage and Emily's tears, and I needed to fortify myself for the morning. Sleep was impossible. My mind replayed David's dismissive laugh, the cold finality in his words, just the babysitter, over and over again. Each time the wound felt fresh, a sharp, stinging reminder of the 1,000 smaller cuts that had preceded it. It wasn't just about those 3 words. It was about the years of being taken for granted. It was about the missed birthdays because I was watching the kids so they could go on a much-needed getaway. It was about the canceled doctor's appointments of my own, because Emily had a last-minute emergency. It was about slowly, imperceptibly erasing myself to make their lives easier, only to be told my contribution was nothing more than a paid service, except I wasn't even getting paid. The sun was barely beginning to streak the sky with pale gray light when the insistent buzzing started. It wasn't my phone. It was the intercom for my condo building. My heart leaped into my throat. It was him. I walked to the small screen by the door and pressed the view button. David's face, distorted by the fisheye lens, filled the screen. He looked terrible. His hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was rumpled, and his eyes were bloodshot with a combination of anger and sleeplessness. He jabbed the call button again. "Carol, I know you're in there." His voice crackled through the speaker, harsh and demanding. "Open this door right now. I'm here for my children." I took a deep, steadying breath. "Go home, David," I said into the intercom, my voice as calm and even as I could make it. "It's 6 o'clock in the morning. The children are asleep." "I don't care what time it is," he shouted, his voice echoing in the empty lobby. "You don't get to make these decisions. You kidnap my kids. It's not kidnapping when you're their grandmother and they are perfectly safe," I retorted. "It's called setting a boundary. You should try it sometime." The accusation of kidnapping, while legally absurd, was designed to frighten me, to paint me as an unstable old woman. It was a classic bully tactic. "I'm not leaving without them," he snarled. "I'll call the police, Carol. I swear I will." "Go ahead," I said, a strange sense of calm settling over me. "Please do." I would love to explain to 2 uniformed officers exactly why a grandmother felt she had to remove her grandchildren from their home in the middle of their father's work party. I have a feeling they'd find the story very interesting. Especially the part about what you called me. There was a brief silence. He knew I had him. The optics were terrible for him. A successful tech salesman calling the cops on his own mother-in-law at the crack of dawn. It screamed of instability, his, not mine. Just as I thought he might give up, another car pulled up to the curb. It was Emily. She got out of the car looking pale and drawn and rushed to David's side. My heart sank. He had called her for backup. He was going to use her as his shield, his emotional battering ram. "Mom, please," Emily's voice came through the speaker, strained and pleading. Please, just let us in. Let's talk about this. This is crazy. The we and us hurt more than I expected. She was standing with him. At least for now. Against my better judgment, I buzzed them in. I couldn't have this fight in the public lobby. When I opened my condo door, they were standing there, a united front of parental outrage. David immediately tried to push past me. "Where are they?" he demanded. I put a hand on his chest and was surprised by my own strength. "They are asleep," I said, my voice low and firm. "And you will not wake them. We will have this conversation in the living room and you will use a quiet voice." He looked at me, shocked by my physical resistance. For a moment, I thought he might push back, but something in my eyes must have stopped him. They walked into the living room, and their presence immediately felt like an invasion. The tense, unhappy energy of their own home had followed them here, threatening to contaminate my sanctuary. David stood in the middle of the room, his hands on his hips, surveying my home with a look of disdain. "So this is your plan," he said with a sneer. "You run off with my kids and hide out in this little shoebox. This shoebox is a home where children are cherished, not hidden away like an inconvenience," I shot back. Emily wrung her hands, her eyes darting between us. "David, please," she said. "Mom, this has gone too far. You made your point. Now can we please just take the kids home? We can talk about this later." "No, Emily," I said, turning to her. "We're going to talk about it now. Because later never comes in your house. Later is always pushed aside for David's work, David's stress, David's needs." "That's not fair," she cried. "I'm doing my best. I'm trying to hold everything together, and you're doing an amazing job," I said, my voice softening. "But you're holding it together alone. Your husband, the man standing right there, sees your mother not as your partner in this, but as the help." I looked at David. "Did you tell her what you said?" The exact words David had the decency to look away. "It was a figure of speech," he muttered. "No," I said. "It was the truth. It was what you truly believe. You believe that because you make the money, you are the only one whose contribution matters. My contribution, my time, my energy, my love is worthless in your eyes. It's just a free service you're entitled to." He finally looked at me, his eyes blazing with a cold fury. "You want to talk about value, Carol Fine? I pay the mortgage on a $500,000 house. I pay for the private schools, the organic groceries, the designer clothes. I pay for the very air you breathe when you're in that house. What do? You play with Legos and read stories. Don't you dare try to equate your little hobby with my career." There it was. The ugly, transactional heart of his worldview laid bare. He saw his family not as a unit of love and mutual support, but as a business he was funding, and he was the CEO. Emily looked horrified. She had surely heard this sentiment before in quieter and more insidious ways, but hearing it stated so baldly, so cruelly in front of her mother seemed to shake her. "David," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't." But he was on a roll, his arrogance and anger fueling him. "No, I will." She started this. "You want to be respected, Carol? Send me an invoice. Let's see what the going rate for a babysitter is these days. 100 a day, 200, I'll write you a check. Then we'll see how valuable your contribution really, Island." He was trying to humiliate me to reduce my love to a line item on his budget. But he had miscalculated. He thought he was showing his power, but all he was showing was his own moral bankruptcy. Emily stared at her husband, her face a mask of shocked disillusionment. The man she had married, the father of her children, was offering to pay her mother for her love. The spell was breaking. I didn't need to say another word. David, in his towering arrogance, had just made my case for me more powerfully than I ever could. The standoff was no longer between me and him. It was now between a husband and a wife who was for the first time seeing him for exactly who he was. The ugly proposition hung in the air of my quiet living room, so toxic it seemed, to suck the oxygen out of the space. "Send me an invoice." David's words, meant to be a killing blow, had instead acted like a defibrillator on my daughter's heart. I watched Emily's face, as she processed the sheer unvarnished ugliness of what her husband had just said. The shock gave way to a dawning horror and then to something I hadn't seen in her eyes in a very long time, a spark of cold, clear anger. She turned to David, her voice dangerously quiet. "Get out." David blinked, momentarily confused. He had expected tears pleading, or a retreat into silence. He hadn't expected a command. "What did you say?" he asked, a hint of disbelief in his tone. "I said, get out of my mother's house," Emily repeated, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You will not stand here and insult her like that. You will not stand anywhere and insult her like that. Get out now." David was flabbergasted. He looked from Emily's resolute face to my impassive one, searching for an ally and finding none. "Emily, be reasonable," he started, falling back on his usual tactic of painting her as emotional and irrational. "I was just making a point. You made your point perfectly clear," she cut him off, her voice sharp as glass. "You see my mother's love as a commodity. You see my work as a mother as a non-essential service. You see our entire family as a backdrop for your career. Point taken. Now leave." The power dynamic had shifted so completely, so suddenly it was breathtaking. David, the CEO of his own little domestic corporation, had just been served a termination notice by his most vital employee. He sputtered for a moment, his face turning a blotchy red. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. For the first time, he seemed to realize he had no leverage here. He was in my home, his wife was united against him, and the moral high ground had crumbled beneath his feet. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out, slamming the condo door behind him with a force that rattled the photos on my wall. The moment he was gone, the fight seemed to drain out of Emily. She sank onto the sofa, the one Lily was still sleeping on, and buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent, racking sobs. I sat down beside her, not speaking, just placing a hand on her back, letting her feel my presence. There were no "I told you so's." There was no need. The truth was out raw and undeniable, and she needed to grieve the man she thought she had married. After a long time, her sobs subsided into sniffles. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen, but clearer than they had been in years. "I knew it," she whispered more to herself than to me. "I always knew he thought that way. I didn't want to see it." It was easier to pretend. "It's always easier to pretend," I said softly. "But it's never better." We sat in silence for a while, the morning sun streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Then a small voice piped up from the end of the sofa. "Is Daddy gone?" Lily was awake, peering at us from over the back of the couch, her eyes wide and worried. Emily quickly wiped her tears, forcing a wobbly smile. "Yes, sweetie. Daddy's gone home for now." "Is he still mad at Nana?" Lily asked, her gaze shifting to me. Before I could answer, Emily spoke. "No, honey," she said, her voice firm. "Daddy was wrong, and Mommy is very, very proud of Nana." She reached out and squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement of the battle I had fought on her behalf. That day was the beginning of a quiet revolution. Emily stayed with me. She didn't go home. She called David and told him she and the kids would be staying at my place for a while, that she needed space to think. The ensuing phone call, which I could overhear from the other room, was a masterclass in his manipulative tactics. He begged, he threatened, he accused her of being brainwashed by me, he swore he would change. But something in Emily had shifted. The foundation of her denial had been shattered, and she was no longer willing to rebuild her life on it. She was calm, firm, and immovable. For the first time, she was setting the terms. During the next few days, my small condo became a sanctuary, a war room, and a place of healing. While the kids played their laughter, slowly chasing the shadows from the corners, Emily and I talked. Really talked. She told me about the constant loneliness, the subtle put-downs, the way David would use money to control her, holding his generosity over her head like a weapon. She confessed that she felt like she had lost herself completely, that Mommy and David's wife were the only identities she had left. And then she revealed a secret she had been keeping for months. "I've been working again, Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She led me to her laptop and opened a folder protected by a password. Inside was a portfolio of stunning graphic design work, logos for small businesses, website layouts for local startups, brochure designs for nonprofits. "I've been taking on small freelance jobs," she explained, a flush of pride on her cheeks. "Late at night after David was asleep. I have my own bank account. It's not much, but it's mine." I stared at the screen, my heart swelling with a fierce protective pride. While I had been worrying about her thinking she was drowning, she had been secretly, painstakingly building herself a life raft. She hadn't been waiting to be rescued. She had been planning her own escape. "Why didn't you tell me, honey?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "I was ashamed," she admitted. "It felt like a betrayal. David always said my work wasn't a real career, that we didn't need the money. I knew he would be furious if he found out. He wants me to need him. His control wasn't just financial, it was psychological. He needed her to be dependent because her independence threatened his sense of superiority. This secret work wasn't just a job, it was an act of rebellion. It was proof that the talented, ambitious woman I had raised was still in there fighting to get out. That night, after the kids were asleep, Emily sat at my dining room table, her laptop open, and for the first time in years, she worked in the open, the light from the screen, illuminating her determined face. She wasn't hiding anymore. A few days later, a certified letter arrived. It was from a high-powered law firm in the city. My hands trembled slightly as I signed for it. Inside was a long, jargon-filled document. It was a formal legal notice from David's attorney. It accused me of parental alienation and unlawful retention of minors. It demanded the immediate return of the children to their father's care and threatened to file an emergency custody motion in family court if we did not comply within 24 hours. David was done trying to persuade. He was declaring war. He was going to use his money and his power to try and crush us to legally rip the children away from their mother and grandmother. He had made his final fatal miscalculation. He thought he was picking a fight with an overwhelmed housewife and a retired old lady. He had no idea he had just declared war on a mother bear and her cub, and I was about to show him exactly how sharp my claws were. The legal letter was a declaration of war written on expensive cream-colored paper and dripping with sanctimonious threats. Words like parental alienation and emergency custody were designed to terrify, to bully us into immediate submission. A few weeks ago, it might have worked. It would have sent Emily into a spiral of panic and me into a flurry of appeasement. But now it had the opposite effect. It was like pouring gasoline on a fire that was already burning bright. I read the letter aloud to Emily at my dining room table, my voice even and steady. As I read, I watched her face. The fear that I expected to see was there, but it was overshadowed by something else, a cold, hard anger. The letter wasn't about the children's welfare. It was about David's control. It was his ultimate power play, a legal tantrum designed to punish her for her defiance. "He would really do that," she whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and disgust. "He would drag his own children through a custody battle just to win. He's not trying to win the children, honey," I said, folding the letter with sharp, precise creases. "He's trying to win you. He thinks that if he can legally take them away, you'll have no choice but to come crawling back to him on his terms." That realization seemed to flip a switch in her. The last vestiges of the timid, accommodating wife vanished, replaced by a fiercely protective mother. "He can try," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Let him try." That was all I needed to hear. The old Principal Matheson in me took over the one who lived for strategy planning and righteous battles. "All right," I said, pulling a legal pad and a pen from a drawer. "He's brought the fight to our doorstep. It's time we showed him what we're made of. First things first, we need a lawyer. And not just any lawyer. We need a shark." I still had connections from my years in the school system, including a few parents who had become heavy hitters in the Chicago legal scene. I made a call to an old friend, a woman named Margaret Lynch, who was now a partner at one of the top family law firms in the state. I remembered her as a sharp, no-nonsense PTA mom who could dismantle a flawed school budget proposal in under 5 minutes. She was exactly the kind of warrior we needed. I explained the situation to her over the phone, from the babysitter comment to the invoice demand to the threatening letter. There was a long silence on the other end, and then Margaret let out a low whistle. "Good Lord, Carol," she said. "You've got a live one. This guy is a classic narcissistic controller. His legal threats are just an extension of his emotional abuse. He's trying to litigate you into submission. Can he win?" I asked. The first flicker of real fear I'd allowed myself to feel creeping into my voice. "Can he actually get custody? It's highly unlikely," Margaret said, her voice reassuringly confident. "He'd have to prove Emily is an unfit mother, which is a very high bar. Your testimony, the context of his behavior, it all paints a very clear picture. His case is all bluster and no substance. In fact," she added, a hint of excitement in her voice, "I think we can turn this on its head. He's the one who created the unstable environment. He's the one whose behavior necessitated you removing the children. We're not going to be on the defensive, Carol. We're going on the attack." The next day, Emily and I were sitting in Margaret's sleek downtown office, overlooking the river. Margaret, with her sharp suit and even sharper eyes, listened intently as Emily, hesitant at first, but then, with growing confidence, told her story. She didn't just talk about the party. She talked about the years of subtle control, the financial manipulation, the constant belittling of her role as a mother. She showed Margaret her secret design portfolio, a tangible testament to her ambition and talent that David had tried to extinguish. Margaret's response was swift and decisive. She drafted a response to David's lawyer that was a masterpiece of legal jujitsu. It didn't just refute their claims, it made counterclaims. It stated that Emily had left the marital home due to David's ongoing emotional and verbal abuse, which culminated in a public display of extreme disrespect. It formally requested that David begin paying temporary child support and spousal support, given his attempts to control all the marital assets. And it attached a motion for a formal psychological evaluation of him, citing his erratic behavior and controlling tendencies as a potential danger to the children's emotional well-being. "We're not asking for his permission anymore," Margaret explained, a grim smile on her face. "We are telling the court that he is the problem, and we are demanding that the problem be addressed. Let's see how Mr. CEO likes being put under a microscope." While the legal gears began to turn, I focused on building our fortress. I knew David's next move would be to try and prove Emily was unstable, or me an interfering old fool. We needed to document everything. I bought a new notebook and started a log recording every text message, every missed call from blocked numbers, every time David's car was spotted, driving slowly down my street, a subtle act of intimidation. I encouraged Emily to reach out to a few old friends, women she had lost touch with because David had found them annoying or a bad influence. She reconnected with a college roommate who was now a social worker and another friend who had been through a contentious divorce herself. They formed a small but powerful support network, reminding Emily that she wasn't alone and that her feelings were valid. The most powerful evidence, however, came from an unexpected source. One afternoon, while Emily was on a call with a potential new client, I was playing a board game with Lily. Out of the blue, she said, "Nana, is Mommy going to have to go back to our old house?" "I'm not sure, sweetie," I answered, truthfully. "Why do you ask?" "Because," she said, moving her game piece with great concentration, "I don't like it when Daddy makes Mommy cry." My blood went cold. "When does Daddy make Mommy cry, honey?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Sometimes at night," she said matter-of-factly. "When he's in his office, he talks loud on the phone and says bad words. And then Mommy comes out of their room and her eyes are all red. She tells me she just has allergies, but she doesn't sneeze." She looked up at me, her 7-year-old face filled with a wisdom beyond her years. "He's not very nice to her, Nana. He thinks she can't hear him, but we can." The conversation was a gut punch. It was one thing for me to witness his disrespect, It was another thing entirely to know that my grandchildren were living in a house filled with a tension so thick that even a 7-year-old could identify its source. This wasn't just about my dignity or Emily's independence anymore. This was about breaking a cycle. It was about ensuring that Lily and Leo grew up knowing that love doesn't shout, that respect isn't conditional, and that no one ever has the right to make you feel small. David's threatening letter, meant to be his ultimate weapon, had backfired spectacularly. It hadn't broken us. It had galvanized us. It had turned a mother and a daughter into a legal team. And it had given a 7-year-old girl the courage to speak her truth. The battle lines were drawn, and our side was stronger than he could ever have imagined. The legal chess match began in earnest. David's lawyers, clearly blindsided by Margaret's aggressive response, were forced to retreat from their initial position of outright attack. The threat of a court-ordered psychological evaluation for David in particular seemed to have hit a nerve. Suddenly, their communications became more conciliatory, suggesting mediation and amicable discussions. It was a transparent attempt to avoid the discovery process, a legal phase where we would be entitled to demand financial records, emails, and other documents. Margaret saw right through it. "He's hiding something," she said during one of our strategy calls. "People like him with that level of arrogance don't back down unless they have something to lose. We need to find out what at Island." She hired a forensic accountant, a quiet, unassuming man named Arthur, who had a reputation for being able to find a single misplaced penny in a mountain of financial data. While Arthur began his digital excavation, Emily and I focused on our own front. The 24-hour deadline on David's letter came and went. We did not return the children. Instead, Margaret filed our official response with the court, along with a request for a temporary custody hearing. The days leading up to the hearing were a blur of preparation. Margaret prepped Emily for hours, role-playing the questions David's lawyer would likely ask, teaching her how to answer calmly and factually, without getting drawn into emotional traps. "They will try to paint you as a hysterical, vindictive wife," Margaret warned. "Our job is to show the court that you are a calm, rational, and deeply concerned mother. Let David be the one who loses his temper." Meanwhile, my role was to provide stability. My condo became a haven of normalcy amidst the legal storm. We baked cookies, built elaborate Lego castles that took over the entire living room floor, and had regular movie nights. I wanted more than anything to shield Lily and Leo from the ugliness of the adult world. But kids are smart. They knew something was wrong. Lily became quieter, more watchful. One evening, she came to me while I was washing dishes. "Nana," she asked, "are Mommy and Daddy getting a divorce?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. "They're trying to figure some things out, sweetheart," I said, drying my hands and kneeling down to her level. "Sometimes grown-ups need to take a little time apart to remember how to be kind to each other." It was the best I could do. 2 days before the hearing, Arthur, the forensic accountant, called Margaret, and he had found the skeleton in David's closet. It was big. The company David worked for, a much-hyped tech startup, was a financial house of cards. They had been burning through investor capital at an alarming rate and had failed to secure a new round of funding. Layoffs were imminent, and the entire company was teetering on the edge of insolvency. David's $1 million night hadn't been about a promotion. It had been a last-ditch, desperate attempt to impress a potential new investor, Mr. Sterling, and save the company and, by extension, his own job. His career, the very foundation of his identity, and his power over Emily was built on sand. But Arthur had found more. In his desperation, David had been liquidating their joint assets without Emily's knowledge. He had sold off a significant chunk of their stock portfolio and had taken out a second mortgage on their house. The money wasn't in their joint account. It had been funneled into a private account under his name only. He wasn't just planning for a downturn. He was building a life raft for one, and he had every intention of leaving his wife and children to sink with the ship. The news was both horrifying and strangely clarifying. David's cruelty wasn't just a character flaw. It was the byproduct of his terror. His need to diminish me to control Emily was a desperate attempt to feel powerful while his professional world was collapsing around him. He was a scared little boy playing king of a crumbling castle. When Margaret presented this information to us, Emily was quiet for a long time. I could see her recontextualizing her entire marriage in her mind. The lavish gifts weren't signs of affection. They were distractions. The expensive vacations weren't for the family. They were for appearances. His insistence that she not work wasn't about her well-being. It was about ensuring she had no financial independence when his own inevitably imploded. It was a long con, a 3-year performance of success and stability that was entirely fake. So the house, she said finally, her voice hollow. The house is leveraged to the hilt, Margaret confirmed grimly. The equity you thought you had is likely gone. He has systematically stripped your marital assets in preparation for a crash. This was the final betrayal. It went beyond disrespect. It was a calculated, cold-blooded plan to leave his family with nothing. Any lingering shred of doubt, any small hope for reconciliation died in that moment. "What do we do?" Emily asked, but her voice was different now. It wasn't the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a CEO whose business partner had just been caught embezzling. It was the voice of a queen whose kingdom was under attack. Margaret smiled a thin, predatory smile. "What do we do?" she repeated. "We go into that custody hearing tomorrow not asking for fairness. We go in holding all the cards. We're not just going to win custody, Emily. We're going to take him for everything he has left. He wanted to send you an invoice. Fine. We're about to present him with a bill so large it will take him the rest of his miserable life to pay it." The hearing was no longer just about who was the better parent. It was about exposing a fraud. And we had the receipts. The morning of the temporary custody hearing, the air in my condo was thick with a focused, electric calm. There were no tears, no panicked last-minute conversations. Emily moved with a quiet purpose I hadn't seen in her before. She chose her outfit with care, not a power suit, but a simple, elegant dress that spoke of quiet confidence. She did her makeup not to hide her exhaustion, but to highlight the new, steely resolve in her eyes. When she looked in the mirror, it felt like she was seeing herself for the first time in years, not as David's wife or Lily and Leo's mom, but as Emily, a woman on the verge of taking back her life. I watched her, my heart, a painful mix of pride and sorrow. Pride in the strong, capable woman she was becoming, and sorrow for the pain that had been required to forge her. While she got ready, I sat with Lily and Leo at the kitchen table, explaining in simple terms what was happening. "Mommy has a very important meeting today," I told them. "So you two are going to have a special adventure day with Nana. We're going to the museum." I needed them to be far away from the toxic atmosphere of the courthouse, insulated in a world of dinosaur bones and butterfly exhibits. When Margaret arrived to pick us up, she gave Emily a quick, approving nod. "You look ready," she said. It wasn't a question. In the car, Margaret went over the plan one last time. "He doesn't know that we know," she said, referring to David's financial treachery. "His lawyers will come in hot, trying to paint you as an unstable mother who abducted her children. We let them. We let them build their entire case on that flimsy foundation. And then, at the right moment, we pull the rug out from under them so hard they won't know what hit them." The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. It was a legal ambush. We arrived at the courthouse, a cold, imposing building that seemed designed to intimidate. As we walked through the marble halls, I could feel the stares. David was already there, standing with his lawyer, a slick, silver-haired man who radiated an aura of expensive, unshakable confidence. David looked haggard but defiant. When he saw Emily, his expression hardened. He took a step toward her, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm, restraining him. Emily didn't flinch. She met his gaze, held it for a moment, and then looked away, a simple, powerful act of dismissal. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. This wasn't a full trial, just a hearing to determine a temporary arrangement for the children while the divorce proceeded. But the stakes felt incredibly high. David's lawyer, Mr. Davenport, began. He was a master performer, his voice resonating through the courtroom as he painted a picture of a devoted, hard-working father whose emotionally volatile wife had been manipulated by her meddling mother into kidnapping his own children. He used words like erratic, unstable, and harmful. He presented the party as a family event and my actions as a gross overreaction. Listening to him, I felt a surge of rage. He was twisting the truth into a weapon, and he was good at it. When it was Emily's turn on the stand, Davenport was relentless. He questioned her about her decision to leave her mental state, her fitness as a mother. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Thompson, that you have a history of being overly emotional?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "Isn't it true that your mother has been actively undermining your marriage for years?" Emily, coached by Margaret, remained unbelievably calm. "It is true that I have been under a great deal of emotional distress," she answered, her voice clear and steady. "The distress of being a full-time, unsupported mother in a marriage where I was consistently disrespected." "Objection," Davenport shouted. "Speculation sustained," the judge said. "Mrs. Thompson, just answer the questions." But the point had been made. Emily answered every question with the same quiet dignity, refusing to be rattled. She spoke of David's absence, his temper, and the general atmosphere of dismissiveness in their home. But she didn't mention the financial fraud. Not yet. Finally, it was Margaret's turn to present our case. She began by calling me to the stand. I recounted the events of the party, sticking to the facts, my voice devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. I told the court about David's exact words, his tone, and the look on his face. Davenport tried to trip me up on cross-examination. "So you admit you took the children from their home without their father's permission?" "I admit I removed my grandchildren from a toxic and disrespectful environment to a place of safety," I replied calmly. "An action any loving grandparent would take." Then Margaret changed gears. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the judge, "Mr. Davenport has painted a picture of my client as an unstable freeloader and her husband as a stable, successful provider. We would now like to introduce evidence that speaks directly to the stability of Mr. Thompson." She turned to David, who was sitting at the plaintiff's table looking smug. "Mr. Thompson, could you please tell the court the current financial health of your employer, Viridian Technologies?" Davenport was on his feet in an instant. "Objection, Your Honor, irrelevant. This is a custody hearing, not a business meeting." "On the contrary, Your Honor," Margaret countered smoothly, "it is highly relevant. Mr. Thompson's entire argument rests on the premise that he is the stable provider and my client is the dependent, emotional one. His financial situation speaks directly to his stability and to his credibility." The judge, a thoughtful-looking woman who had been watching the proceedings with a keen eye, paused for a moment. "I'll allow it," she said. "Answer the question, Mr. Thompson." David froze. A deer in the headlights. He looked at his lawyer, who could only give a slight, helpless shrug. The company is going through a transitional period," he stammered. "A transitional period," Margaret repeated, letting the euphemism hang in the air. "Would a more accurate term be on the verge of collapse?" She then presented the court with the forensic accountant's report, a thick, damning document detailing Viridian's financial implosion. She followed it up with bank statements showing David's secret account, the liquidation of their stocks, and the second mortgage on their home. She presented it all with a calm, methodical precision, building a case brick by brick that David wasn't a provider. He was a desperate gambler who had been secretly selling off the family's assets to save himself. The color drained from David's face. Davenport was speechless. They had walked directly into the ambush. Margaret wasn't finished. "Your Honor," she said, her voice ringing with conviction, "the evidence shows a clear pattern. Mr. Thompson doesn't just disrespect his wife emotionally, he disrespects her financially. He has treated their marital assets as his personal slush fund. This isn't just about a rude comment at a party. This is about a man who has systematically deceived and defrauded his own family. He is not the stable parent here. My client, the woman who has been secretly working to build her own career while single-handedly raising their children, is the stable one. We ask the court to grant her sole temporary custody and to freeze all marital assets immediately before Mr. Thompson can drain them any further." The courtroom was silent, the only sound the rustling of the papers Margaret had just submitted into evidence. David stared at Emily, his expression a mixture of hatred and disbelief. He had come here to humiliate her, to legally bludgeon her into submission. Instead, his own meticulously constructed world had been dismantled before his very eyes. The babysitter's daughter, the quiet, emotional housewife, had just checkmated him, and the game was far from over. The judge declared a brief recess to review the new financial evidence. The moment she left the bench, the courtroom erupted into a flurry of whispered conversations. David's lawyer, Mr. Davenport, was frantically talking to his client, his face pale, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. David wasn't listening. He was staring at Emily, his eyes burning with a toxic mixture of fury and utter bewilderment. He looked like a king who had just watched a peasant storm his castle and take his throne. He had built his entire identity on the foundation of being the successful provider, the one in control. Margaret's surgical presentation had not just undermined his legal case, it had demolished the very core of his ego. Emily, for her part, remained seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She didn't look triumphant. She looked free. The fear that had been her constant companion for years was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable strength. She had faced the monster, and she had discovered he was just a man, a scared, deceitful man. When the judge returned, the atmosphere in the room was electric. She looked at the documents before her, then at David, and then at Emily. Her expression was unreadable, but I sensed a shift. We had changed the narrative. This was no longer a simple he said, she said custody dispute. It was a case of financial malfeasance and emotional manipulation. Mr. Thompson, the judge, began, her voice devoid of its earlier neutrality. "The evidence presented by the respondent is troubling, very troubling. It suggests a profound lack of transparency and a potential breach of fiduciary duty to your spouse." She then turned her attention to Mr. Davenport. "And Mr. Davenport, I am frankly astonished that you would bring this motion for emergency custody based on the flimsy premise of a family squabble while your client was actively liquidating marital assets. It borders on frivolous." Davenport winced as if he'd been slapped. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Pending a full hearing, she declared temporary sole physical and legal custody of the minor children Lily and Leo Thompson is awarded to the mother, Emily Thompson. All marital assets are to be frozen effective immediately. Mr. Thompson is to have supervised visitation with the children twice a week at a neutral location to be determined by the court. Furthermore, this court is ordering a full financial audit of both parties and a mandatory psychological evaluation for Mr. Thompson. It was a complete and total victory, more than we could have hoped for. David sat there stunned into silence as the judge's words rained down on him like hammer blows. He had come here seeking to punish his wife and had ended up losing his children, his money, and his reputation in one fell swoop. As the bailiff called the next case, we gathered our things to leave. David stood up, his movements stiff, and for the first time he looked truly defeated. He walked over to our table, his lawyer trailing helplessly behind him. "Emily," he said, his voice a low, ragged rasp. "We need to talk." "No, David," Emily said, standing to face him, her height almost matching his in her heels. "You've done enough talking. From now on, you can talk to my lawyer." She turned to leave, but he grabbed her arm. "Emily, please," he said, and for the first time I heard a note of genuine desperation in his voice. "I can fix this." "Fix what, David?" she asked, pulling her arm away, her voice not angry but weary, so profoundly weary. "Fix the fact that you lied to me for years. Fix the fact that you were stealing from our family to cover your own failures. Fix the fact that you see my mother, the woman who has given us everything, as nothing more than the help. Some things can't be fixed. They can only be ended. With that, she turned and walked out of the courtroom, her back straight, her head held high. I followed her, leaving David, standing there, a man utterly alone in the wreckage of the life he himself had destroyed. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal and personal reconstruction. With his assets frozen and his company imploding, David's world fell apart. He lost his job. He was forced to move out of the house and into a small rented apartment. The psychological evaluation, as Margaret had predicted, came back with a damning diagnosis: narcissistic personality disorder with severe control issues. His supervised visits with the children were awkward and strained. Without the backdrop of his big house and expensive toys, he seemed lost, unable to connect with them on a basic human level. Lily and Leo were mostly just confused, and after a few visits, they started asking if they had to go. Meanwhile, Emily blossomed. Freed from the oppressive weight of her marriage, she poured all her energy into her design business. The story of her legal battle, which had been subtly leaked to a few design blogs, had turned her into something of a local hero. Clients, mostly women-owned businesses, flocked to her, drawn to her talent and her story of quiet resilience. She was working harder than ever, but she was happy. She was energized. She rented a small office space so she could separate her work from her home life. And she began to build a new life for herself and her children, a life based on her own terms, funded by her own talent. I stepped back, transitioning from co-pilot to supportive ground crew. I still helped with the kids, but now it was different. It was a choice, not a necessity. Emily would call and ask, "Mom, are you free to watch the kids on Thursday?" I have a big client meeting, and I would happily agree. There was respect in her ask, and joy in my acceptance. I was no longer a function. I was family, appreciated and valued. One afternoon, about 3 months after the hearing, Emily called me. "Mom," she said, her voice serious, "David wants to meet. Just the two of us. He wants to talk about the final divorce settlement." "Do you want me or Margaret to come with you?" I asked immediately. "No," she said, and her voice was firm. "This is something I have to do myself." They met at a neutral coffee shop. I spent the entire hour pacing my living room, my stomach in knots. When she finally came home, her expression was calm. "What happened?" I asked. "He wants to settle," she said. "He's willing to give me the house, full custody, and a significant amount of child support. He doesn't want to go to trial. He just wants it to be over." And in return, I asked, knowing there was always a catch. "In return," she said, looking me straight in the eye, "he wants me to agree to a joint therapy program." "For co-parenting," he said. "He said he knows he messed up, that he doesn't know how to be a father or a partner, but he wants to learn. For the kids." I was stunned. It was the first time he had ever admitted fault, the first time he had ever shown a glimmer of humility. "What did you say?" I asked. I told him, she said, a small, sad smile on her face, that it was a start. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reconciliation. But it was a flicker of hope in a story that had been so dark. It was a chance not for their marriage, but for their children to have a father who was perhaps finally willing to learn what it meant to be a family. The decision to agree to co-parenting therapy was not an easy one for Emily. A part of her, the wounded, angry part, wanted to sever all ties, to walk away and never look back. But the mother in her, the part that looked at Lily and Leo's faces every night as they slept, knew that David, for all his monstrous flaws, was still their father. And if there was even a sliver of a chance that he could become a better version of himself for their sake, she had to take it. It was a testament to her strength, not her weakness, that she chose the harder, more compassionate path. The divorce was finalized quickly after that. David, stripped of his arrogance and his financial leverage, was surprisingly compliant. He signed the papers, giving Emily the house, sole custody of the children, and a generous child support agreement that was tied to his future earnings, ensuring he couldn't hide his income. He seemed like a different man, quieter, more subdued, the blustering CEO replaced by a man humbled by the complete implosion of his world. The first few therapy sessions were brutal. I would watch the kids while Emily went, and she would come back to my condo looking emotionally drained, as if she had just run a marathon. The therapist, a wise, patient woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, forced them to confront the ugly truths of their marriage. She made David listen, truly listen, as Emily described the years of feeling invisible, of her contributions being devalued, of the constant soul-crushing loneliness she felt, even when he was in the same room. She made him acknowledge the cruelty of his babysitter comment, not as a figure of speech, but as a reflection of his deeply ingrained disrespect. For his part, David, guided by Dr. Sharma, began to unpack the sources of his own toxic behavior. He spoke of a demanding, emotionally distant father who had equated love with financial success. He spoke of his crippling fear of failure, a fear so profound that it had driven him to build a life based on appearances, even if it meant lying to and stealing from his own family. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. It was the first time Emily had ever seen the scared, insecure man behind the arrogant facade. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to build something new. Not a marriage, but a functional partnership. They learned to communicate without yelling, to discuss the children's schedules and needs without it devolving into a power struggle. David started to show up for his supervised visits, not as a guest who needed to be entertained, but as a father. He learned how to pack a school lunch. He learned the names of Leo's favorite dinosaurs and the complex social dynamics of Lily's first-grade class. He was clumsy and awkward at first, but he was trying. The real turning point came one Saturday afternoon. It was Lily's first soccer game. David's visitation wasn't scheduled for that day, but he called Emily and asked, his voice hesitant, if he could come. Of course, David, Emily had said. You're her father. He showed up, standing awkwardly on the sidelines away from the other parents. Lily, when she saw him, broke into a huge radiant smile and waved. In that moment, watching his daughter's unadulterated joy at his presence, something seemed to click for him. After the game, he didn't just leave. He came over to where Emily and I were standing with Leo. She played great, he said, his eyes on Lily, who was chasing a soccer ball with her friends. And then he looked at me. For the first time, he looked me straight in the eye, and there was no arrogance, no condescension, just a deep, profound shame. Carol, he said, his voice quiet, I am so sorry. For everything. It wasn't a grand speech. It was just 6 simple words. But they were the words I had been waiting to hear, not for my own sake, but for my daughter's and my grandchildren's. They were the words that signaled that true change was possible. I know, David, I said softly. Just be a good father to them. That's all that matters now. From that day on, things continued to improve. The visits became less supervised, more natural. He would take the kids to the park or to a museum and bring them back on time, their faces happy and animated. He started paying his child support without fail. He even started sending Emily links to graphic design competitions with notes saying, "This looks like your style. You should enter." They were small gestures, but they were significant. They were acts of respect. Meanwhile, Emily's business was exploding. She had to hire 2 junior designers to help with her workload. She was featured in a local business journal as a rising star. She had rediscovered her passion, her talent, and her identity. She was no longer just a wife and a mother. She was a successful entrepreneur. She was vibrant, confident, and happier than I had ever seen her. My role shifted again. I was no longer the rescuer or the protector. I was simply Nana, the beloved matriarch. I had my own life back. I started traveling, taking the trips Frank and I had always planned. I volunteered at the local library, reading to children. My life was full and rich, not because I was filling the gaps in someone else's life, but because I was living my own. One evening, Emily called me. "Mom, what are you doing Saturday?" she asked. "We're having a barbecue. Just a small thing. I'd love for you to come." "I'd love to," I said. "Will David be there?" "Yes," she said. "He's bringing the hot dogs." The casual normalcy of it was astounding. A year ago, the idea of them being in the same backyard voluntarily would have been unthinkable. Now it was just life. It was a messy, complicated, imperfect, but ultimately hopeful life. The war was over. The hard work of building a lasting peace had begun. The barbecue was on a perfect sun-drenched Saturday in late summer. Emily's backyard, once a pristine, manicured space that felt more like a golf course than a place for children, was now wonderfully, chaotically alive. There was a brightly colored swing set in one corner, a half-finished fairy garden project near the patio, and a collection of soccer balls and sidewalk chalk scattered across the lawn. It was a yard that was truly lived in, and it was beautiful. I arrived to the sound of children's laughter and the smell of grilling hot dogs. Lily and Leo ran to greet me, throwing their arms around my legs in a tangle of joyful energy. "Nana, you're here. Daddy's making his famous curly hot dogs," Lily shouted, dragging me towards the grill. And there he was, David. He was wearing a faded college t-shirt and a baseball cap, a far cry from the power suits I was used to seeing him in. He had a look of intense concentration on his face as he carefully sliced hot dogs into spirals before placing them on the grill. He looked up when he saw me, and a genuine, unforced smile touched his lips. "Carol," he said, "glad you could make it. You're just in time." The curly dogs are about to reach peak crispiness. The scene was so profoundly normal, so utterly different from the nightmare of the previous year that it felt almost surreal. I watched as he interacted with the kids, laughing, as Leo tried to steal a hot dog off the grill, patiently explaining to Lily why the curly ones cooked faster. He was present. He was engaged. He wasn't on his phone, he wasn't distracted by work. He was just being a dad. Emily came out of the house carrying a large bowl of salad, her face glowing. She was wearing a simple sundress, her hair tied up in a messy bun, and she looked more beautiful than I had ever seen her. She came over and gave me a kiss on the cheek. "Isn't this nice?" she murmured, her eyes sweeping over the scene in her backyard. "It's perfect," I said, and I meant it. We ate at the picnic table, a jumble of paper plates and mismatched napkins. David and Emily talked easily, discussing school schedules and upcoming parent-teacher conferences. There was no tension, no subtext. It was the easy, comfortable chatter of two people who had been through a war together and had come out the other side with a hard-won respect for each other. They would never be husband and wife again, but they had become something perhaps even more important. They had become a team for their children. Later, while the kids were running through the sprinkler, Emily and I sat on the porch, swing the same one where I had found her shivering and alone on that terrible Thanksgiving night. Now it was a place of peace. "You know," she said, her voice thoughtful, "I was so angry for so long. At him, of course, but also at myself. For letting it happen. For not seeing it sooner. You can't blame yourself, honey," I said. "People like him are masters of control. It happens so slowly you don't even realize the cage is being built around you until the door is locked." "I know," she said. "But what I've realized through all the therapy is that staying wasn't a weakness. It was a kind of strength. I was trying to protect my children, to give them the stable family I thought they needed. I was wrong about what stability looked like, but my intentions were good." She was right. She had been a warrior all along, fighting a battle on a different front. "And you know what else I've realized?" she continued, a small smile playing on her lips. "He never would have changed if you hadn't done what you did. I was too tired, too beaten down to fight. I would have just kept enduring it. You were the earthquake, Mom. You shook the foundation so hard that the whole rotten structure had to come down. It was terrifying, but it was necessary. You didn't just save me. You saved him from himself. And you saved those kids from growing up in a house where their mother was invisible." Her words were a gift. They healed a part of me I didn't even know was still wounded, the small, nagging fear that I had overstepped, that I had interfered where I shouldn't have. But she was telling me that my act of rebellion hadn't been an act of destruction, but one of creation. It had created the space for a new, healthier family to be born from the ashes of the old one. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the yard, David came over to the porch. "Kids are getting tired," he said. I should probably get them packed up and ready to go home. He looked at me, then at Emily. Thank you for this, Em. It was a really good day. It was, she agreed. We should do it again soon. After he had gone taking the children with him for his weekend custody, Emily and I sat in the gathering dusk. The silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't empty, it was full. Full of peace, of contentment of a future that was bright with possibility. My story started with 3 dismissive words, just the babysitter. But it ended with a new definition of family. A family that isn't about power or control, but about respect. A family that can be broken and rebuilt stronger and more beautiful than before. My name is Carol Matheson. I am a mother and a grandmother. And I have learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to start a war to find a lasting peace. And that is a lesson worth fighting for.